You're watching the 100 and 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Today we're talking about Skyfront VR, a zero-gravity first-person shooter that you will definitely want to try out. In our VR Gear game reviews, we like to cover as many aspects of the game as possible so that you can make an informed decision before you try or buy one of these VR titles. That's exactly what we're going to do today for Skyfront VR, so let's jump right in. Skyfront VR is appropriate for all ages and is a bloodless first-person shooter, so you can expect the graphic content to be at a minimum for this one. It's mostly a game about learning what physics is all about in space, which we're not quite sure if this accurately captures physics in space, but it is definitely different than your normal first-person shooter that is based here on Earth. So let's jump in to this review of Skyfront VR. All right, so let's talk about getting up and running with Skyfront VR. This game is going to take up at least 7 gigabytes of storage on your computer, and it's going to take quite a while to download, anywhere between 10 minutes and 2 hours, depending on your internet connection. So be prepared to wait a little bit before you're ready to play this game after starting the download. After the download is completed, installation is pretty automatic. We got ours from the Viveport Infinity Store, although this is available for the Oculus as well, and it's on the Steam Store. While this game is a first-person shooter, it's not limited to just playing against the bots. You're able to play in a multiplayer arena with Skyfront, and you can play with your friends online while you learn how to master the mechanics and the physics of floating around in space with your weapons. Skyfront VR is still in early access, and they are relying heavily on early users of the game to provide feedback on what features they'd like added or bugs that they've found while playing the game. The game is not free, however, even though it is in early access, so expect play up front. And hopefully, as an early user of the game, you can provide feedback that will help shape and mold the game into something that you will like down the road. This game is played from the first-person perspective, and you won't see much more than your hands while flying through the zero-gravity arena. The 2 game arenas that come with the game are fun to navigate, but it's easy to get disoriented as you're moving through them. After a couple of rounds, you will become familiar with where things are and how to navigate, but at first it's a little bit disorienting because there is no gravity and there is no up or down. But as you master this type of environment, it will play to your advantage and help you win more matches or find the enemy more readily or figure out how to maneuver and navigate to them in order to get the kill. The theme and story around this game is quite hard to pick up, although the theme is zero-gravity multiplayer combat. There is not necessarily a story or a backstory to how we got into space, why we're here, what's the point of fighting in zero-gravity in space suits instead of perhaps a spaceship. But the theme is clear, and that is you are responsible for defeating the enemy in zero-gravity, match after match after match. And so you are placed in the arena to fight in zero-gravity, learn how to navigate around, learn how to manipulate your environment, and how to fight the enemy and shoot them down. You will be able to participate in 2 different types of battle modes. There is deathmatch, which fills the arena with bots, or there is multiplayer deathmatch, which allows you to fight with other people that are also online and have logged into the servers. So the controls in this game were very basic and pretty intuitive once you got the hang of it. I kept wanting to use the joystick, but you don't need to. However, I think it would have been better to use the joystick. The way that you move about is pulling the trigger of one of your hands. Mine was the left. I pull the trigger, and wherever I would aim my left hand, that's where I would begin to travel. Although I would not rotate in the direction, and so to rotate, I had to physically turn in my predetermined play area. This was somewhat disorienting, and I wish that I had an untethered experience while doing this because the cord kept getting wrapped around my head, and so I had to adjust the cable organizers above my head. The other way to move about is when you squeeze the controller of the same hand where you can point your movement direction, it shoots out a grappling hook that will attach to a nearby surface and then pull you toward that surface. And so if you get really good at moving around, you can pull yourself toward a surface and release and then continue to point the direction that you're moving, all while physically rotating in your play space. The controls, for the other hand, are simply pulling the trigger to fire and squeezing the grip to reload. And that's it. Those are all the controls. After a few minutes, I got the hang of it and I did pretty well. For the music and sound of this game, you will find some theme music in the menu that sounds a lot like what you would expect right before you jump into some sort of flight simulator. I don't know if it quite matches what the gameplay is, but there is some theme music there that gives you the impression that you're about to take off into the air. As far as sound effects go, we all know space doesn't have sound, so hearing yourself shoot a gun or pull yourself with the grappling hook, it doesn't make logical sense that those exist. However, they do enhance the gameplay. All right, so player movement. Now, this is the unique thing about this game, as well as the pain of this game, as well as the differentiator between people who are good and people who are bad. Movement is what this game is all about. I personally don't like this type of movement model where you can move in any direction. There's a lot of freedom in your movement. You can move up and down, forward and back, up to the angle, down to an angle. All of this movement is done through pointing your left controller, as discussed earlier, and then rotating in space is done by physically rotating in the real world, and then it mirrors your new direction in the virtual world. The one thing you can't do is go inverted. You can't turn upside down in this play arena with some sort of input from the outside world or from the real world input into the game through your controllers. So you'll end up vertically upright the whole time, moving throughout the level. And as you do this, you're able to pursue the enemy and dodge oncoming assaults. Overall, the player movement was somewhat intuitive. It was helpful that you didn't go inverted to keep orientation in some way, but this type of player movement isn't my favorite. It tends to be what causes motion sickness for me and a lot of other people. All right, speaking of motion sickness, let's talk about it. The thing that causes motion sickness, as we all know, is when your visual cues don't match your physical cues, and this game was filled with it. If you have the stomach for a game like this, there's a lot of ways that you can move about the arena as you're playing. This game is all about navigating a zero-gravity arena in search of your opponents. And there's nothing about this arena that my physical body was experiencing, and therefore I got motion sick really fast. As far as environment immersion goes, there was nothing special. Really, there was nothing special about the graphics. There was nothing special about the interaction model that made it immersive. The thing that made me immersed was the fact that I was battling against somebody in real time, and that made me want to focus on what I'm doing. A good measure of how immersive something is how much focus you apply to the game or the experience, causing you to forget about the natural world or the real world outside of the VR experience. All right, so let's look at the overall scorecard for Skyfront VR. For story and theme, we are giving Skyfront VR a 5 out of 10. This is because there is no story accompanying the game. There is a clear theme, and the theme is multiplayer, online, battle royale type style of fighting. But overall, the theme is a 5 out of 10 because there's lacking a story in this experience. For controls, we're giving this game a 7 out of 10. The high score of 7 is because the input is simple. There's not a lot of different inputs that you can do, and that's a good thing. On the flip side, the controls don't allow you to do as much as you perhaps would like to do. I personally didn't want to go inverted, but there are people that do want to go inverted, and there are no controls for that. It's also problematic when interacting with the trigger and the grip on the same controller for reloading. I ended up reloading several times when I really just wanted to fire my weapon. For music and sound, we're giving this game a 6 out of 10. There were audio tracks that were somewhat engaging, added to the level of intensity, and made the game a little bit more immersive, but there was nothing really impressive about the audio here. And the sound effects, they weren't that impressive either. Firing of weapons and the elimination of opponents, these sounds also weren't that impressive. So a 6 out of 10 for music and sound. Okay, so for motion sickness, this game is getting a very low score. It breaks all the rules of what to do to avoid motion sickness in VR. It does the opposite. So we're giving this game a 1 out of 10 for motion sickness. Player movement in this game is getting a 6 out of 10. A 6 because there's a lot of simplicity to the way that you move about, but there's some points deducted here because your free range of motion immediately becomes limited when you're thinking about becoming inverted or going in any direction, including any orientation. For environment and immersion, we're giving this game a 4 out of 10. There was nothing really about the environment that was compelling. You were in space, but you felt like you weren't. There was music, but it wasn't that engaging. There were sound effects, but they weren't that convincing. And so the immersion came just because of the type of game, and any multiplayer online game would cause the type of immersion that you felt. All right, so the final score for Skyfront VR, the overall score is a 4.8 out of 10. Now, this score might be a surprise to people that are looking at some of the reviews on the different stores, but this is according to our VR Gear game review criteria that includes a lot more aspects and a lot more thorough review of different elements of the game that will matter to you as a new player. That is Skyfront VR. This has been 100 in 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you can be notified tomorrow when we release another VR Gear game review. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.